Hi everyone, my name's Liz. I'm one of the welfare benefits specialists on the advice line. So if you email in, I'm one of the advisors who would help you with welfare benefits and general carers inquiries. I've got a presentation today that we can just run through. I'm not sure how many of you actually already claim carers allowance. Do you claim carers allowance already? Or is it maybe something you're not sure about? Michael, you put your hand up, so maybe you might claim it. Okay, so let me just get the right button to click. Here we go. Right, so what I find a lot on the information line is, and it's not just me, I did talk to a couple of my colleagues, and we find that a lot of people who are in a caring role don't realise that actually sometimes they're missing out on quite valuable help and support financially. And the main benefit that people who are in a carer's role can claim is the benefit called carer's allowance. So this is a non-means tested, so that means it doesn't take into account your household income or any savings or capitals that you have. There is a cap on how much you can earn if you're in employment, but I'll talk about that in a minute. It's paid at a rate of £67.60 a week, which is the current rate. And it is a taxable allowance. So that means that if you had any other income, such as private pensions or any other welfare benefits, it would count towards your tax-free amount. So you can't have more than 1,200 and I think it's £75 a year tax-free. After that, you would need to pay tax on it. So it does count towards your taxable income. Now, the thing with carers allowance is that it can link you through to some other welfare benefits. So it might be that actually you can't be paid carers allowance because of your wider financial circumstances, but the fact that you could be paid to it might lead to you being able to access other welfare benefits. So this is through something called underlying entitlement. It happens a lot when people start to claim the state pension. Because those two benefits overlap with each other. It doesn't mean that you can't be a carer when you start to claim your pension. What it does mean is that as far as the welfare benefit system is concerned, you are not expected to look for work because you're caring. You're not expected to look for work because you're retired. So therefore, you are in the same category twice. So you're not expected to look for work because you're caring, you're not expected to look for work because you're retired. So therefore, only one of those benefits can be paid to you. It can get a little bit complicated, but don't worry, we can cover that. And so carers allowance is widely missed. People don't claim it because they think they won't be entitled to it, or they think that actually there's no point in claiming it, but it does have added benefits that we can look at. So the next thing I just wanted to briefly go over is actually for a small benefit such as carers allowance, it has a huge number of qualifying eligibility criteria. Okay, so the first one is you have to look after someone who gets a qualifying disability benefit. Within the welfare benefit system, there are different categories of benefits. So one is if you have a long-term disability or health condition, these are known as disability benefits. There's benefits if you're unable to work because you yourself have a long-term health condition, which means you're not able to work. So these are known as work replacement benefits. So you can claim a work replacement benefit. In this case, it could be employment and support allowance or incapacity benefit, or could be universal credit and a disability benefit together, two separate categories. So a disability benefit, the three main disability benefits that are commonly known are disability living allowance. So this is a benefit now for new claimants that you need to be 16 and under if you live in England. There are a lot of people who receive disability allowance still who have been on it for quite a number of years. And at some point they need to transfer over to a different disability benefit, but at the moment disability living allowance is still paid to some adults. If you were over 16 but under state retirement pension age, then the disability benefit would be known as personal independence payment, which is known as PIP. And if they are over state retirement pension age, then it would be attendance allowance. Now, the thing with the state retirement age is, as you know, it has been changing a lot over the last year or so. So, well, one time we used to say if you were under 65, you could claim it, but now actually it's 66 and a bit. It's while the women's pension age goes in line with the men's pension age, and eventually they will become static, and then there will be a set age for claiming it. There are some other disability benefits that are recognised in terms of carers allowance. So one is called constant attendance allowance, and this is normally paid alongside industrial injuries benefit or some war pension schemes. So if some people have been injured in the course of action, if they were part of military service, for example, they could get a war pension. They might get industrial injuries through that scheme, or they could get industrial injuries based on a workplace injury, or there's something called an armed forces independent payment. Again, is applicable to military personnel. So those two, constant attendance allowance and armed forces independent payments, they're the ones that get missed a lot because it's more commonly thought that you need to be getting one of the more commonly claimed disability benefits, but that isn't the case at all. So after the person is in receipt of a qualifying disability benefit, and it has to include the care component or the daily living component. So this is that somebody needs help and support with their daily living activities, such as washing or bathing or eating or drinking, for example, keeping them safe. You need to be providing this care and support for at least 35 hours a week. So this can be time spent physically helping that person. It could be time spent keeping an eye on them. It could be time spent by supervising, being in the same house as someone, preventing them from coming to harm by maybe walking out of the house, for example. It can include things like practical tasks for them. So cooking a meal for them, changing their bed for them. It's not general housework as such. It has to be something that has an end purpose for that person. You can also count towards this 35 hours time that's taken doing practical tasks, even if you don't do them in the presence of that person. So for example, if you have to go to the bank to pay in some money for that person, if you need to go to the shop to collect some groceries for that person, okay? It can't be for other people that you can count, although you could potentially do two things at the same time. You need to be doing it for that person. So if they were coming for tea at your house, for example, preparation, the time of the visit, and then cleaning up afterwards can also be counted. Now, what is a little bit tricky when it comes to these 35 hours of care is that if you are providing care and support to two people, you have to be only providing 35 hours of countable care to one person for carers allowance, even if you are supporting two people, so say two parents, for example, or two children. You can't claim combined care. It has to be for one person or another person. So it could be that actually you need to make a decision about which person you are going to claim carers allowance for, and look to see if there was another person who could claim carers allowance for that other person, for example. And then the next anomaly when it comes to carers allowance is that for a caring week, the caring week for carers allowance, it begins on a Sunday and it ends on a Saturday. So that can be very tricky if you're in employment, for example, because most working weeks run Monday to Saturday, whereas this is running Sunday to Saturday. So that sometimes can be a little bit tricky. So it means that if you claimed carers allowance, your claim would start on the Sunday of that week. So if you made the claim on the Monday, you would only ever get paid 6 days for that week, not the 7th day. So it's a little bit of an anomaly when it comes to carers allowance and the particular welfare benefits in this system. Let's have a little look. The next thing, this is probably the most straightforward one. You can only claim carers allowance if you're age 16 or over. You can make a claim up to 3 months in advance, but you will only be paid on the day that you become 16. You cannot be in full-time education, and this actually is quite a common inquiry that we're seeing at the minute. A lot of carers want to study. They want to take an evening course, they want to learn some new skills, But in order to keep carers allowance, you cannot be in full-time education. So the meaning of full-time education is really complicated, and it depends on a number of factors, including the kind of course you're doing and how it is described by the educational establishment. So for example, some courses may be described as full-time, but actually you're only physically studying in the campus, say for 10 hours a week. The rest of the time is designated as supervised study or self-led study. So the fact that your university, school or college describes something as full-time, it might not actually be a full-time course. A general guide is if you are required to do in any shape or form, so either physically be present during a course or doing self-study learning or research, or you're expected to do 10 hours of study a week, completing assignments, is if that totals 21 hours a week or more, then that would impact on your ability to claim carers allowance. But the thought behind that is you're expected to do 35 hours a week care. How can you fit in 21 hours a week study as well if you are going to do more than that? So if you are classed as being in full-time education, then the impact of that is even during temporary absences from your course, so say the school holidays, the summer break. If it's a 2-year course, in between year 1 and year 2, you're still not able to claim carers allowance because you're classed as still being in full-time education. So if anyone is thinking of doing any type of course, not only do you need to discover, as a carer, there's lots of bursaries available and funding grants and extra support available through the establishments, but you need to be really mindful of the expectation to make sure that it doesn't impact on carers allowance. The next one that we need to get over is if you are going to take a part-time job. So for a lot of carers, to get a little bit of respite, to get some me time, maybe gain some new skills, another route instead of taking an educational course might be to take a part-time job. So with employment, the key thing here is that you have to find out as early as you can how much you're going to get paid and the pay cycle it relates to. So we've got 2 types of employment. So we've got as an employee of a business, and we've got as a self-employed person. Now, the way income is calculated, so this is earned income, it's very different based on whether you're an employee or if you are or if you are a self-employed person. But either way, the earning limit is the same. It's £128 a week. If you earn even 1 penny more than £128 in a week, then you will lose the whole of the carers allowance for that week. There is no sliding scale. So we need to be really mindful of how this works. And this is why that caring week comes into effect. So if you're paid weekly, then you can only earn £128 a week in that week. If you're paid monthly, you need to establish, are you being paid for a calendar month? In which case, because there are 31 days in some months, it works out to be 4 weeks and 3 days. So if that is the case, it isn't quite 4 weekly pay and it isn't quite 5 weeks, it's a calendar month. So in order for the carers allowance unit to work out how much your average weekly pay would be if you're paid monthly, they look at, it's a calculation, so they'll take how much you're paid monthly, they will times it by 12 to give a yearly amount, and then they will divide it by 52 to give you a weekly amount. And if that divide by 52 amount is less than £128 a week, you will be eligible for carers allowance. If it's over £128 a week, you would not be eligible for carers allowance during that period. So you have to be really mindful, and you've got to know how much you're being paid and what that pay period is. Now, a lot of us are on salaries, for example, so you might have a salary for the whole year, it might be divided by 12, and then you know how much your salary is going to be each month. So in that case, it will be you could not have more than £554.66 for that monthly period. Now, that doesn't always sit nicely with employment. There are some weeks where you might get asked to do an extra shift. It might be sometimes that you know Christmas is coming and there's going to be extra work available. So you are able to ask, if you know in advance, for the carers allowance unit to consider, is this a one-off? If it's a one-off, you can ask for a caring break, and there are some eligibility rules that I'll cover at the end. Or secondly, is it that actually you're going to have something called a fluctuating cycle? So over 5 weeks, you might have 2 weeks where you have quite low wages, but actually on the 4th week, you do an extra day. And this is going to be a regular cycle. And so if you can see a regular cycle, the carers allowance unit will take that into account and they'll calculate it slightly differently. So the key thing is here, I think, actually, is that if you are not sure, it's always to just double check with them. What you can do to try and reduce your earned income. Now, please remember, this is only for carers allowance. There are other other eligibility criteria rules when it comes to income for other benefits. So in terms of carers allowance, any tax or national insurance you pay are deducted from your earnings. Okay, so what we're trying to do is make something below £128 a week. If you pay into an occupational or personal pension, half of your contribution can be deducted. If your employer also contributes to a personal pension, that can't be counted. It has to be your actual contribution yourself, but only 50% of that. If because of your work you have to pay someone to look after the person you care for, or a child who's under 16 who you or your partner get child benefit for, you can deduct these payments from your earnings, okay, up to half the value of your earnings. So for example, if you were earning £100 a week and you were paying £60 to an after school club, you could only claim £50, which would be half of the £100, towards looking after someone, cost and expenses. There are some rules. So it has to be an organisation, for example, or anybody who is not a close relative of yourself or the person you're caring for. So you can't pay a spouse, partner, civil partner, a parent, a son, a daughter, brother or sister, for example. You could pay a friend, you could have a nanny, a childminder, it could be an after school club, for example, but you have to be able to provide receipts of this. Just on an extra note, sorry, and I'm really happy to take questions at the end, or if anybody wants to pop them into the chat box. If you receive an occupational or personal pension, that would not count towards this £128 a week. You could be paid carers allowance in addition to those pensions, and you would also have any money from earned income through employment. If you are self-employed, the figures are taken from your previous year's tax return. If you haven't submitted a tax return, so this is to do with your profit from your business, if you haven't submitted a tax return, they will then take it over a 13-week period and look at how much earnings your business had accumulated, what your profit is, and they will take that figure from there. Okay, so it's a bit of a tricky one. The next one, if you're not in work, you'll be pleased to know. The next one is about, you have to satisfy UK presence and residence conditions. So with all welfare benefits, there are what is called habitual residency tests and also past and present rules. So for example, for carers allowance, you have to meet both of the following conditions. You must have been physically present in Great Britain. So this also includes Northern Ireland for carers allowance for 104 weeks out of the previous 156 weeks. So this is 2 out of the last 3 years. Okay, so you have to be physically present in either England, Wales, Scotland or Northern Ireland for at least 2 years out of the previous 3 years. And they're very pedantic. They'll go down to the nearest week. So you have to be able to account for when you were in the country and if you were outside of the country. Present means physically present. Okay, There are some exceptions. So, for example, if you're a member of the armed forces, and the past-present test does not apply to people who are recognised as refugees and their families. So they get a different type of protection if somebody is a refugee. Now, the next past test you have to pass is known as habitual residency test. So this test is applied to everybody, including British citizens who have lived abroad. So for example, I could have lived out in Spain for the last 25 years. I've come into the country as a British citizen. Now the question will be, have I been here for the last 2 of the 3 years for carers allowance purposes? So no, I haven't. I was out in Spain. Is there any other benefits I could claim? So potentially there could be some other benefits, but the habitual residency test is now going to be applied. And this is, what is your intent? Where are you going to make your home? Where are you going to live? What is your reason for coming to this country? And this also looks at what ties do you have to this country. So have you registered with a doctor? Have you sold your property abroad? Have you bought a house, for example? Are you living with family members? Do you have a job? So these are 2 things, and these apply to all welfare benefits, not just carers allowance. So it's worth just knowing if you have a family member or if you come from abroad, that alongside the other eligibility criteria, we have these 2 to contend with as well. I did mention very briefly about refugee status. Now, in general, if you have something called no recourse to public funds as part of your immigration status and a restriction on your stay in the UK, you are not able to claim most welfare benefits, housing and homelessness services. So this would be, for example, if you come into the country as, I don't know, a spouse on a spousal visa, for example, and as part of that visa restrictions, your spouse has said that they will be able to support you financially. So as a result, the expectation will be on your spouse to support you rather than the welfare benefit system. So some people have immigration restrictions placed upon them, so you wouldn't be able to claim carers allowance in that case. So you can seek further immigration advice because it gets a little bit complicated there. It gets easier, I promise. So with carers allowance, I mentioned it very briefly right at the very beginning. The welfare benefit system, it has compartments and different people slot into different systems based on your circumstances. Now, in some circumstances, you cannot be in 2 places at the same time or be claiming and receiving money from the same pot of money twice. So this is known as underlying entitlement to welfare benefits. So if you would be entitled to carers allowance, but you're not able to be paid it because you are receiving another benefit that overlaps, the underlying entitlement takes you forward to see if you can claim any other benefits. So the most common one that we come across would be state retirement pension. And as I've mentioned, it doesn't mean that you can't be a carer when you claim your state retirement pension. It's just that you are now claiming 2 benefits. You are saying that you are retired, but you are caring. And the way the system is set up, that just doesn't work for it. It is something that Carers UK have been running a campaign about for a number of years. It's worth talking to your MP about it. The louder and the more attention we can bring to it, hopefully soon something will be recognised for the better for it. We have the whole range of contribution-based benefits. So these are national insurance contributions paid. So these are things like employment and support allowance, incapacity benefit, contribution-based job seekers allowance. So this is money that is being paid out of the National Insurance Fund. And whenever somebody has contributed into the National Insurance Fund, payment will always come from that fund first. So for any contributory benefits before carers allowance. So that pot of money will be paid first and then potentially carers allowance would follow. The same follows for maternity allowance, bereavement, any type of widow's benefits, and any severe disability allowance. So these are ring-fence pots of money, and these are paid first. Within the benefit system, we have priority benefits that are paid before other benefits. But the easiest thing to remember is that if in doubt, claim it the worst that can happen is you'll get a letter saying that you cannot be paid it because, but you have an underlying entitlement to it. And that letter can then help you access other benefits, maybe housing benefit or help with your council tax. But it can also be used to recognise your housing status. So there's nothing that you can do that would harm your claim. So in a nutshell, you need to look after someone in receipt of qualifying benefit. That's your starting point. You need to be looking after them for 35 hours a week. You have to be over 16, not in full-time education, not in earned employment of more than £128 a week after allowable deductions. You have to have been in the UK for the previous 2 out of 3 years. You have to prove that you're habitually resident, so as in this is your intention to live here. And for some of us, this is natural, okay? And you can't be in receipt of an overlapping benefit. And there's a link there just to it in more detail. But there is just 2 more things you need to check. 2 more things. By making a claim for carer's allowance, it can sometimes impact on the disability benefit, sometimes impact on the person who has the long-term disability or health condition, any benefits that they themselves get. It would have no impact on any disability benefits. So the PIP, attendance allowance, DLA, constant allowance, or war income forces payment would not be affected in any way. If they were getting the state pension, that would not be affected either. What could be affected could be the housing benefit, if they were getting that, council tax support, pension credit, if they were getting any employment and support allowance, for example. So any of the means tested benefits could be impacted. And this would only be the case if the disabled person or the person with the long-term health conditions lived on their own or was counted as living on their own. So living with either a dependent person, so a child, or if the adult in the household that they lived with also received a disability benefit, because they would then be classed as living on their own. This is all to do with the loss of something called a severe disability premium. It's worth £67.30 a week, and that person may lose that premium if a claim for carer's allowance is made. So it's a case of taking it from one hand and giving it to the other hand. This only happens if the person lives on their own. If they live with another adult, for example, who doesn't receive a disability benefit, or with grown-up children, or if they're living in with you, if you're your parent, for example, this wouldn't apply. But it's always worth knowing that you should check their benefits as well, because not only can it have an impact on the person's benefit you're claiming for, it can also have an impact on your benefit by increasing the amount you can receive. This last point I just want to raise is one that comes up a lot around this time of year. So when people are leaving full-time education, you can claim carer's allowance when you're 16. But if you claim carer's allowance when you're 16 and you have a parent or a guardian who was claiming a child-related benefit for you, so such as child benefit or child tax credit or the child element in universal credit, if the 16-year-old claimed carer's allowance, which they could do, then as a parent or guardian of that young person, you will lose the child-related benefits that you were receiving for them. This is because once that person starts claiming welfare benefits in their own right, the system sees them as a claimant in their own right, and so forth, they will pay any benefits to them directly. The welfare benefit system, we won't pay twice for the same person. So it won't pay a child-related benefit to a parent and pay the child or young person who has made the claim directly. So decisions have to be made there about whether the parent or guardian is okay with losing the money, because sometimes it can be a substantial amount. So the young person carer can then claim carer's allowance. So there's a lot of weighing up that has to be done. And the last thing might be useful to know is that you can take a break from your caring responsibilities for any reason. So it might be if you're going to do some extra hours at work, it might be that you're going to go on holiday, and you can have a break for, let me say, it's for 4 weeks in any 26-week period. So this is 8 weeks in a year, as long as you've been caring for that person for the previous 22 weeks. they have been receiving a qualifying benefit, and you ask for it well in advance. Okay, you need to ask well in advance for that to happen, and you contact the carers allowance unit. I would always recommend that you do it by phone. You take note of who you speak to and when you talk to them, and on those grounds you can still do extra work, or you can take time away, maybe have a holiday, and still receive carers allowance during that period. Okay. And if you're not eligible for carers allowance, I'll just pop this on the end here, you might be eligible to claim carers credit instead. It's only really beneficial for people who are under state retirement age and not in receipt of a state retirement pension, because carers credit credits your national insurance fund, which helps pay your full state pension. Again, you've got to be providing care to someone in receipt of a disability benefit, but you only need to be totaling care for 20 hours a week or more, and with this one it can be to more than one person. So if you're providing care and support to 2 people, you can add that care together to make the 20 hours. So if you're not paying national insurance and you're not in receipt of your state retirement pension, then applying for carers credit could really help you see a big difference when it comes to the time that you're claiming your state retirement pension. There's a little workaround, and that's as part of the application process, you can get a healthcare professional to sign a declaration just to say that that person has a long-term health condition or disability, and you are providing care and support to them. So it's well worth doing if you're not going to be eligible for carers allowance, which does allow for a credit to be given to your national insurance record actually. So just a couple of links to where you can claim and where you can find out further information. And at any time, don't forget to always ask for backdating. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. So you can get up to 3 months for carers allowance and up to the previous tax year for carers credit. There we go. Bit of a whistle stop tour around carers allowance and a little bit to do with carers credit.
Hi everyone, I'm Priya and I work on the community care advice line at Carers UK, and today I'm going to be talking about disability related expenses. So I'm just going to start off with, disability related expenses are useful to think about when a financial assessment is taking place. And this is for the adult who is receiving care. And what's useful about it is that it could reduce the contribution that the adult has to make towards their care services. And I have found in sort of the cases that I work on and the inquiries that I come across that not always local authorities will push for this. So it's really important that you have a think about this if your loved ones are receiving a service from the local authority and they're paying a lot of money towards their care services, because you may be able to get a reduction in thinking about what DRE they may have. That's what it's also known as. So it's basically any extra costs that you have that are linked to your disability or health condition. They are also costs which are not covered by the NHS or social services and which are paid for privately out of your own finances. The local authority has to leave you with enough money to pay for the necessary expenses to meet the needs which are not being met by the local authority. So it is a really important point as part of the care assessment and as part of the financial assessment. Local authorities generally allow £15 a week or £20 a week, but it may be that the person that you're looking after has a lot of expenses, and so that's something that you want to have a think about, whether are they being left with enough money from their benefits or other income to pay for these things. So the care and support statutory guidance is works hand in hand with the Care Act legislation, which is the law that relates to adults needing care. So the guidance and the Care Act are both legislation pieces. The guidance isn't legislation, but it's guidance that the local authority has to take into account. So they go hand in hand together. And what paragraph 39 of is part of Annex C of the guidance, and what that basically says is that where disability related benefits are taken into account, the local authority should make an assessment and allow that person to keep enough benefit to pay for necessary disability related expenses to meet any needs which are not being met by them. So this means that the local authority has to leave the service user enough money from their benefits to pay for their expenses they have towards their disability expenses. So the things that you want to think about are, what is the service user's disability living allowance, PIP or ESA or income support or universal credit? What is that used on? How much are they left with once they have used their benefit on vital services, expenses and needs? And sometimes with that, you can do an income and expenditure sheet, which shows the sort of weekly incoming and outgoing costs, and that will leave you with the amount that they're left with at the end of the week or the month. And you can find this template online, and you may be able to seek advice from Money Advice Service or your local Citizens Advice Bureau. They might be able to help you fill that out if you need some help with that. So one of the questions you may be now thinking is, what can be claimed as DRE? And the Care and Support Guidance, Annex C, paragraph 40, lists out all of the expenses which can be claimed. It's important to know that this list is not exhaustive, so there may be expenses that are not listed there that your loved ones do purchase, and so you can put that forward as long as it is linked to their health condition or ill health or impairment. So it might be payment for any community alarm system. It might be costs of any privately arranged care services, costs of any specialist items that might include day or night care, which is not arranged by the local authority. You might be paying for care of privately to cover night care, because I know a lot of local authorities do not provide night care. So you might be having expenses for that. And specialist washing powders or laundry. Some have sort of skin conditions, which means they need to use particular washing powder or laundry, and that is maybe more expensive than the average laundry that people use. Additional costs of special dietary needs due to illness or disability. So it may be that somebody has specific nutritional requirements. That means they need to have maybe organic food. It may mean that they're lactose intolerant. It may be that they need to have gluten-free food to help symptoms like it could be anything like a thyroid issue or polycystic ovaries, something like this. So it's good to speak to the GP if that's an issue, and maybe they can put you in touch with a dietitian to give you a supporting letter or to advise on what expenses are useful or what foods need to be bought. Specialist clothing or footwear, where this needs to be specially made. So sometimes people might need to have special shoes or trainers made for them, or it might be particular clothing, like sometimes cotton might aggravate the skin, so they might need to wear other sorts of fabrics, or vice versa. It might be that cotton aggravates the skin. It could be anything, so that's something to also think about. Additional costs of bedding due to incontinence. It might be that you're having to purchase more bedding because of incontinence issues. So that could also be another expense. Any heating costs above the average level areas for the area and housing type. So some conditions might mean that you need to keep the heating on a lot more, like especially in the summer. Maybe some people with, like for example, fibromyalgia might need to always be in a warm environment. So you need to keep the heating on. It could be, or it could be any health condition that means they need to keep warm all the time. and your heating is, and then so you incur more heating costs. The same goes for water costs as well. If you're having to wash clothes more often because of incontinence, then your water bill higher than average because you're using it a lot more. And so that's something to think about. Anything occasioned by age, medical condition or disability. Reasonable costs of basic garden maintenance, cleaning or domestic help. It might be that the care package that the person has only covers 2 hours of domestic help and the local authority cannot pay for any more. So it may be that you're having to pay a cleaning company to come in to clean the home. Purchase, maintenance and repair of equipment. That could be sort of any equipment that's not covered by the local authority. So that could even be one-off costs that you may have purchased. Personal assistance costs, internet access, for example, for blind and partially sighted people, other transport costs, and which are over and above the mobility component of the DLA. So when you are putting forward transport costs, the local authority are going to come back to you initially to say, well, your mobility component can cover that. So you need to think about whether the transport costs are over and above the mobility component. And if they are, then just say that at the start so that they can take that into account and there's not any more delays in them considering that expenditure. So like I said, that list is not exhaustive. So there may be expenses which which are not there, which can be claimed, and some things to think about are prescriptions. With that, the local authority are always in battle with the NHS. They always say, well, the NHS should pay for that. The NHS will come back to you and say, well, no, we're not paying for that. So it's a sort of tag problem between the local authority and the NHS. One of them has to pay for it. So it's between the two of them, and usually it comes down to the local authority. So when you are sort of putting forward prescriptions which are not available under the NHS and which you have to pay for privately, it's always good to get a letter from the doctor to say this is not available under the NHS, you have to use your own money to pay for it, and then the local authority will consider that. Holidays and respite, do you have to pay for a carer or rent out equipment when away? Therapies, do you have to pay privately for therapies, like physiotherapy, osteopathy, counselling, and acupuncture? I know with some of those, there are services under the NHS which are time limited. So if that is the case, then it's best to, again, get a letter from the GP to say that, yes, my patient has had 6 sessions, but the NHS will not cover anymore and they have to pay privately now. So you're providing evidence for your claims, and that's what the local authority want to see. Home delivery costs if you're unable to go to shops because of your condition. Are you having to pay for the delivery for your shopping, like Sainsbury's or Tesco or wherever you shop, or your Amazon or your shops if you're shopping online? If you're unable to get out, are you incurring expenses because of that? Assistance dog costs, insurance, vet bills, etc. So if you have a pet and or an assistant dog, then that can also be a valid expense. Insurance will cover certain things, and the local authority will go through this with a fine-tooth comb and look at the insurance, and will ask you to give them the insurance documents because they will want to see what exactly is covered. And anything outside of that, that's what you need to put forward. So I know with some pets, some assistance dogs, some like insurance sometimes only covers a certain amount of money for certain procedures and certain sort of injections, and anything above a certain amount, then the person has to pay for themselves. So it's good to look at that. Even if you're the person you care for doesn't have an assistance dog, some local authorities do allow for pet expenses. So it's worth putting that forward because some pets are therapy pets, and some pets are completely vital for someone's well-being. So it is always worth trying that as well. You just have to link it to the person's condition and their well-being. So bear that in mind too. Household cleaning, which is paid privately. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, where maybe the care package only allows for a certain amount of money and you're having to pay privately for a cleaning company to come in to clean the home. It's important to remember that each individual case is really different, as disabilities and long-term health conditions impact people in many different ways. So the starting point is to think about your day-to-day life, the services you use, and what your regular expenses are. Start to check your bank statements, Amazon orders for your regular expenses. So evidence is quite key in this sort of matter under community care, and the council will ask for evidence for your expenses. And so your evidence can be receipts, it can be bank transfers, invoices, contracts, or medical letters. Like I said, supporting letters from the GP is really vital, and it can prove to be quite useful. Like, for example, therapy, which is, like I said earlier, not available under the NHS, might be available only for a short amount of time. Conditions which cause you to be more sensitive to heat or cold, which require heating to be on more often. Like I said, I mentioned these earlier with water as well. You know, are you having to use more water for showers, baths? Some people sweat a lot, and that means that they need to have a shower twice a day, for example, because their medication causes certain reactions. So it's a lot to think about, but once you do start to think about the day-to-day life of the person that you care for, I'm sure you can think of some expenses that you may not have actually thought about before. So there are some things that are not considered disability expenses, and these are general items or services required for daily living, which is used by the general population. So like your, you know, like Netflix or, you know, these sort of things. Actually Netflix can be arguable to be an expense, because sometimes if someone is housebound, they can actually put that forward as an expense. I did have a case where I put that forward once. It came back rejected, but when we explained that the person is housebound and watches Netflix to maintain their well-being, then it was actually eventually accepted. I guess just general expenses are things like, you know, like cleaning products, or just things that are used for daily living, like your groceries, etc., which are not specifically for diet-related purposes. Any item or service which is met by a payment from a grant or a funder. So, for example, like a disabled facilities grant, if you choose to buy items or services where there is a cheaper alternative, or which can be provided by the NHS for free. With that, again, that can be argued. If you're paying privately for therapy and you need counsel, and your loved one needs counselling, the local authority might come back and say, well, you can have talking therapies under the NHS. And you can always go back to them and say, well, talking therapies I've tried it, it's not been useful. It's not actually tailored to what I'm going through mentally. So you can always argue those things as well. If they do say to you that there's a cheaper alternative, and if you've tried it and it's failed, then you can put that forward to them. So some useful tips on this is to ask the local authority for their policy on disability expenses and or charging. It may be on their website, so check there first. You can appreciate some council websites are not sort of easily accessible, or it can be quite difficult to find. So just give them a call, and I'm sure that they can sort of guide you where it is, or they can send it to you. Speak to your GP and medical consultant to see whether they can provide any supporting letters to confirm what your expenses are. Think about what your expenses are, regularly, which contribute towards the health condition or illness. And check what the council's flat rate is towards DREs. Most of them I've come across is £15 or £20 a week. So you can only actually put forward expenses if they're more than that amount. Some are actually £5 a week, so it really does depend on the local authority. Ideally, in an ideal world, it would be the same everywhere, but they do vary. So there is some case law that is useful if you are if you are in the complaints stage of this sort of particular matter, because it's really, I can appreciate that it's really difficult to evidence every single expenditure that you have, because, or provide a detailed background, because you know it takes a lot of time, and it's not always possible to show that expense. So there was an ombudsman case against, and this was against East Sussex County Council, and the judgment of this was that there may be occasions where it's not actually possible for a service user to evidence every spend, provide a detailed background. So local authorities are encouraged to consider each application on its merits. And so they should consider that it's not actually possible for service users to provide receipts for everything, because no one actually keeps receipts all the time. And it may be that you didn't know that you needed to keep receipts. So they should consider the circumstances in the case. And that's why when you do put forward your disability expenses, it's really important that you give a really good detailed sort of an explanation as to why the expense is and why you actually don't have the receipt or evidence for it. And if they are really being picky, then you can say, well, they can come and see the actual item if they really need to. And there's another case here which went into the High Court that was against Cornwall County Council and Brendan Trust. This case basically said that the initial means test that happened, that there should be no charge because of the high level of expenditure that the person had. And there was obviously a dispute with the council, and it was held that they acted unlawfully in failing to consult with the person and his family, that there was actually evidence in the care plan to justify the level of expenditure, and basically the local authority had failed to provide the family an opportunity to provide the necessary evidence. So that's another thing that you can put forward, is looking at the actual care plan, because there may be things in there that you can pick out. And so when you're challenging decisions, you want to ask the finance team to look at their decision again and assess what expenses that they've not allowed and put forward more evidence if possible. Always link your arguments to the guidance, so it's there, paragraph 40. Start the complaints process, start it as soon as you can, follow the procedure, ask for their policy so that you can see how many stages there are and what their timeframes are for responding. If the complaints process is not useful, then you can go to the ombudsman and ask the ombudsman to look at it. You can also look into legal aid. You can instruct a solicitor to look at the case for you. This type of issue is within scope of a community care legal aid contract. So the solicitor can assess whether you have a challenge or not by reviewing all your relevant documents and advising you of what expenses you need to consider and putting forward your case for you. So sometimes it's quite useful to put your expenses clearly to the local authority. So I've given an example here where you can set out a table for them. And so I've just given the example of incontinence pads. I'll just put £8.99 per month for two packs a month. Your reason for expenses, the incontinence pads are not available. Well, they are available under the NHS, but the particular one that the NHS cover is not suitable for the person. And I've just linked it to the guidance here. It would come under occasioned by age, medical condition, or disability. And your evidence, you can say, please see attached receipts. And you've got the letter from the GP confirming that those particular pads are not available under the NHS. I've used this example also because this comes out a lot in these types of cases where the local authority will say that, well, the NHS can provide you with incontinence pads, but some NHS providers only provide a particular type of incontinence pad, and it doesn't always suit the person because it may be not suited to their skin. It may be just that it just doesn't work for them. So, it does come up a lot, and you need to be able to argue back and explain why that is. And yeah, that's just our contact details. If you want to have if you want some more advice on this, or you are in the middle of a dispute about expenses, and please do get in touch with us, and we can look into it for you and advise you.